Welcome to the Jews Are Tired podcast. I'm your host, Lev Gringauz. Usually I have a podcasty intro with music and everything, but I ditch all of that when something really serious comes along in the world of Jewish news. This week, unfortunately, that serious thing is the hostage crisis that happened last Saturday, Shabbat, at Congregation Beth Israel, a synagogue in Texas. A British citizen took the rabbi, Charlie Citron Walker, and 3 other congregants hostage for 12 hours while they were live streaming services to the rest of the synagogue community. All the hostages made it out alive. The hostage taker, however, is dead, either killed by the FBI teams that entered the synagogue or by suicide. There's a lot about what happened, how it happened, and why it happened that still isn't entirely clear. But Jews got lucky in kind of a sick way this time around. Thanks to the pandemic, the synagogue wasn't full, and thanks to this being a hostage situation and not just a straight-up shooting, there was a chance to save people. Part of me thinks that means we all need to shut up and sit down until more information comes out. But obviously that's not what's happening, as anyone who has seen the Jews on the internet can say. As the hostage crisis was unfolding, the hot takes just came pouring in about synagogue security, Jewish safety in America, anti-Semitism, hinting that the rabbi being taken hostage deserved it because of his politics. Needless to say, there's a lot that needs unpacking here. Of course, why should I talk about these hot takes? And way more importantly, why should you listen to what I have to say? I won't pretend like what I'm going to say about this isn't, at the end of the day, my opinion. It is. But I like to think it's the reasoning that matters based on facts and reality. Although, having said that, it's hard to actually take any of those words seriously when they've been so eroded in the United States over the past decade. So, take it or leave it. Truthfully, I'm thinking of this episode as somewhat of a time capsule. In a few weeks, I don't think I will agree with everything I think and say now. Maybe a few days or even hours after this is published, I'll already disagree with what I say. It's not the first time that has happened. But we just had a hostage crisis at a synagogue. Sometimes you just need to process what this was and what the hell everyone else was busy yelling about on social media as it was happening. So if you hear something in this episode that you don't like, most likely we'll end up in the same boat. Okay, enough waffling. Let's just go step by step through some of the not-so-great hot takes expressed about the hostage situation. It'll be messy, but let's start with a talk about anti-Semitism in context of the fact that the hostage taker was a Muslim. I saw some takes on Twitter from progressive Jews talking about how the hostage crisis shouldn't stop Jews and Muslims from working together to fight white supremacy. And to me, there are 2 things going on there. First of all, the instinct to defend the Muslim community as this was happening. On one hand, I get it and I agree with it. There's a lot of Islamophobia in the United States and, to be perfectly frank, in the Jewish community. And the last thing anyone needs is for people to start throwing abuse at Muslim communities just because the hostage taker was Muslim. We're all minorities in this country and we all need to look out for each other. On the other hand, it was kind of frustrating that Jews were being attacked, held hostage in a synagogue, and one of the first things said over and over again by many Jews, not just leftist Jews, but a lot of prominent local Jewish leaders across the country, was that we can't let this add to Islamophobia. And I can't help but have this feeling of, could we not just focus on the fact that we were being attacked? But again, in a country where we are 2 minority communities targeted with harassment and violence, it makes sense to me that that had to be said. The other issue, though, relates to anti-Semitism specifically. In my experience, a lot of leftist and progressive Jews focus on anti-Semitism as being a systemic problem in Christian and particularly white American Christian culture, and all of that sort of being an element of white supremacy. Which, by the way, is true. I would agree based on the number of attacks, the level of organization, the political power of white supremacists in the United States, that white supremacy is a very clear and present threat to Jews in this country at the moment. But that kind of analysis that sort of everything is about white supremacy leaves out the fact that anti-Semitism doesn't just exist in white supremacy. It is also a systemic problem in Muslim culture and communities. That can't just be glossed over because of the potency of white supremacy in America. This ties into the next kind of hot take I saw across social media, which is trying to paint this event, this hostage-taking, as a singular kind of lone wolf attack, As in, this was just one guy doing this for individual reasons disconnected from anything else. Part of the rationale is that the hostage taker was mentally unwell. His family wrote on Facebook that he suffered from mental illness, and truthfully, it was clear from the live stream and the things he was saying that the hostage taker was not healthy. So in this case, you really could argue this was just a case of mental illness gone horribly wrong. I also think, honestly, it was part of the Jewish impulse to protect the Muslim community to try and say that this was an attack sort of unconnected with anything else. Because otherwise, we do have to talk about systemic anti-Semitism in the Muslim world that contributed to an unwell man doing such a horrible thing. And unfortunately, that is a conversation that can be and is easily twisted into Islamophobia in the Jewish community. But the larger problem is that I see a lack of consistency with how we talk about this kind of violence. A lot of white supremacists who attacked Jews and other minorities have been and are mentally unwell, but we don't paint them off as just, singular guys doing something horrible, because we understand that even though they are not healthy, they are still tied into a larger network that fed them prejudice and hatred and led them to make the decisions that they made. So it just doesn't make sense to say the hostage taker in this situation is an exception. That's highly unlikely. Over the past 25 years, before we really woke up to the networks of white supremacists driving hatred and violence around the world, there were countless lone wolf attacks on the Jewish community and other minorities that were also sort of brushed off as singular attacks disconnected from anything else. The shooting at the Kansas City Jewish Community Center in 2014, shootings and bombings against Jews and other minorities in the summer of 1999, those attacks were done by white supremacists, and we later realized that, a lone wolf attacker is always somehow connected to a larger network of extremism and ideology that led them or helped them to do what they did. But it's also hard to be clear about, what the actual network was in this case. And to explain what I mean by that, let's get a little more specific about the larger context to this hostage situation. The hostage taker demanded the release of Afia Siddiqui, a Pakistani neuroscientist related by marriage to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a member of the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, who is accused of being the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks. Siddiqui was arrested in 2008 for allegedly planning attacks for Al-Qaeda in New York and was sentenced to 86 years in prison for trying to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan. Her prison is in Fort Worth, Texas, and guess what? Congregation Beth Israel is located in a nearby suburb of Fort Worth. Siddiqui is also known for her anti-Semitism, saying at the time of her trial that there should be no Jews in the jury that tried her case. She said then, quote, "If they have a Zionist or Israeli background, they are all mad at me, and I have a feeling everyone here is them, subject to genetic testing. They should be excluded if you want to be fair." There is a prominent worldwide movement to free Siddiqui, which says that the allegations against her are false, that Siddiqui is innocent, and that she was severely mistreated and sexually abused by American soldiers while detained in the 2000s. To my knowledge, taking hostages is not a central aspect of the movement. So let's be clear about a couple of things here. This information is obviously relevant context, but there is no direct, clear line from, for example, the movement to free Siddiqui to this guy deciding to take hostages and to try and free her. Siddiqui, via her lawyer, said she was against the hostage-taking for what it's worth, but we just don't have the rest of the story. There's nothing and no one specific to point a finger at, again, when it comes to that broader network of extremism and ideology that inspired this act. So the question remains, what, in fact, possessed a man to take hostages and to decide that of all places to do this act, he should go to a synagogue and take Jews hostage? Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker told The Forward that the hostage taker, quote, was someone who literally thought that Jews control the world. He thought he could come into a synagogue and we could get on the phone with the chief rabbi of America and he would get what he needed, end quote. Thinking that Jews control the world, that's not just a thought in an individual's head. Those are anti-Semitic ideas that have spread and been reinforced across all kinds of communities and places. Yes, Christian, and yes, Muslim. But that still doesn't tell us specifically why this man decided to do this thing in this way. The massive gray area here between what can be assumed about anti-Semitism broadly and what actually at the end of the day drove the hostage taker confused the FBI, which originally said the hostage crisis was, quote, not specifically related to the Jewish community. Obviously, many Jews did not accept that answer, and later the FBI released a statement saying the Jewish community was, in fact, targeted, which, we know that. But another weird thing in all of this is the Facebook post from the hostage taker's family, which you can find a link to in the podcast notes. A British journalist took screenshots and put them on Twitter. So here's the weird bit. Quote, "It is absolutely inexcusable for a Muslim to attack a Jew or for any Jew to attack a Muslim, Christian, Hindu, vice versa, etc., etc." End quote. Why there was the need to talk about Jews attacking anyone in this situation is beyond me. But it's not like I know the family and can say anything factual about if they are or are not anti-Semitic and how that did or didn't tie into the hostage taker's decision. Unfortunately, there's a lot to try and figure out because this guy came to the U.S. from Britain, is presumed to have bought guns while here, and decided to target this specific synagogue in Texas. But now, back to sort of the bad Jewish hot takes on the hostage crisis. Specifically now, the right-wing hot takes I saw during the actual situation as people were in danger. I saw some people tweeting about how Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker is a politically progressive rabbi, and he apparently signed a statement advocating against Israel annexing the West Bank back when there seemed to be a real chance of that happening in 2020. And these people were basically like, see, even if you ally yourself with the other side, they'll still attack you. Because saying annexation of Palestinian territories is bad means you're allying with the Muslims against the Jews. I mean, that's just complete and utter crap. And it implied that, the rabbi deserved being in a hostage crisis because he has politics I don't like. And that is absolutely unforgivably insane. I'm a Zionist. I think about Israel a lot, but I don't need to make every single thing involving Jews, particularly a hostage situation at a synagogue, about Israel politics. Out of all the takes, this is the one I'm probably angriest about. I don't care what kind of Jew you are or what you think about Israel. No one deserves to be taken hostage. It's that simple. And turning the situation into some sort of global Jewish, Muslim, us versus them thing is precisely the kind of Islamophobia that now the rest of the Jews have to spend so much time telling people not to do. So this right-wing looking down on Rabbi Citron Walker was also seen because the hostage taker was actually invited into the synagogue because he said he was homeless. So the rabbi did a good thing. He welcomed a stranger to give him some food and shelter for a little bit. But of course, because the rabbi is Reform and he's progressive and he does interfaith work, it turned into some bizarre right-wing narrative of, see, you trusted them and this is what they did to you. For the love of God, people, the rabbi did a good thing. It is not his fault the man turned out to, take everyone hostage. What, should we just stop caring for poor people? Stop caring for homeless and unhoused people? What level of deranged is this? I get we are afraid of being attacked, but does that mean we stop caring for the world around us? In case you can't tell, again, this is the stuff I'm really, truly furious about. And then these people had the audacity to demand that every single Muslim community leader condemn this attack. And you know what? We can and need to talk about anti-Semitism in Muslim communities, but that doesn't mean that if a Muslim does something bad, every single other Muslim is responsible and accountable for that action. Let's just put it in Jewish terms. In fact, let's put it in Israel terms. American Jews are harassed all the time when Israel does something. Like, so many Jews have stories of just going about their day, and then they get asked about Palestinians and what they think of Israel, and we know that's anti-Semitism. We know that assuming every Jew and Jewish community is somehow responsible and accountable for what a Jewish state does, that's anti-Semitic. That is literally one of the prime examples of anti-Semitism in the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. So why are we suddenly saying that that's okay to do to Muslims? By the way, so many Muslim community leaders across the country released statements condemning the hostage-taking. But regardless, what kind of demand is that from Jews to automatically jump to everybody needing to say something because the hostage-taker was a Muslim? That's not appropriate and in fact is Islamophobic. to again draw the parallels to the same thing happening to Jews being anti-Semitic. So, okay, let's sort of leave that stuff behind for what are, in my opinion, some more sort of complicated takes. First of all, there was some anger for a while over a perception that the quote-unquote, mainstream media weren't covering the hostage crisis, or if they were covering, the coverage wasn't prominent enough on the front page of their website and stuff like that. There was particular ire against the New York Times on this, even though they were definitely covering the story and their live news feed was all about the hostage situation as it was happening. But hey, if you're not satisfied with the New York Times, may I introduce you to the Washington Post? I subscribed to WAPO and got several notifications from them as they were covering the hostage crisis, so no complaints from me on mainstream news coverage. The more complicated aspect of this was when news organizations printed stories and headlines based on the FBI's original statement that the hostage taker hadn't specifically targeted the Jewish community. Jews were obviously frustrated. Again, you can't just, target a synagogue and take Jews hostage and not be specifically targeting the Jewish community. On one hand, the news organizations were not at fault. They were right to report what the FBI was saying on this, and it was their job because the FBI is the main authority in dealing with the hostage taker. It wasn't the Associated Press's fault that the FBI said something weird. At the same time, there is always a concern about a lack of knowledge among journalists about anti-Semitism and their ability to add important context and challenge when the FBI or, other people get it wrong. But Jews were and are obviously frustrated about reporting on anti-Semitism and Jews more broadly, and the kind of attention we tend to get. And that frustration also ties into a perspective I saw posted, and this is one that I really struggle with, which is an assumption that no one pays attention when the Jews are attacked, and that not enough allies are coming out to support us, and that more people and friends need to be actively posting on Facebook and Twitter about this stuff. First of all, I, for one, have no expectation of who posts what on Facebook or Twitter. People are allowed to post or not post about whatever political or allyship thing they want. I think it's all performative anyway and ultimately has no meaning. I largely don't post about when bad things happen, even when they happen to Jews. Like, how does my Facebook post help anyone? At the same time, I understand that for many people, they want to feel supported and seen by all their friends posting on social media, and it's important to them that that happens. But to me, that's just not important. But the more dangerous assumption to me here is that no one pays attention when the Jews are attacked. And that's tied into this feeling that, everyone pays attention when other minorities are attacked, like we're the only minority that doesn't really count. And that's utter crap. As any member of any other minority group can tell you, there are so many issues that are overlooked by everyone. Do you want a really good example? Asian Americans. Racism and violence against Asian Americans has skyrocketed during the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of people have been very seriously injured and killed. For example, the same day, Saturday, as the hostage situation, an Asian American woman in New York City was pushed in front of an oncoming subway car and killed. She was pushed into the subway and died. The man who pushed her is homeless and mentally ill. And even though the case isn't being investigated as a hate crime, it obviously is incredibly painful for Asian Americans in context of all the racism they are facing. The only people I saw on Twitter posting about this attack were Asian Americans, Asian American Jews, and mostly Asian American journalists. It's the same thing, no matter your perception of what liberals or progressives or the left or who they care about or post about online, you still have groups who are suffering hatred that most people don't turn up for, don't do marches for, don't post about, don't pay attention to. The reality is that all minorities are left in the dust in this country no matter who says what. We don't need to make this a competition of who is more left in the dust. That helps no one, and it definitely doesn't help Jews. A really complicated thing I saw being posted online was about the fact that the hostage taker is dead. A lot of the language we use, 4 hostages were taken and everyone came out alive, for example, glosses over the fact that someone still died. And honestly, personally, I would have preferred he be taken in alive, but I am not particularly bothered by the fact that a hostage taker is dead. And I know that's, to some, a very crude and cruel way to look at things. I just don't have that bone in my body to have sympathy for this man in this situation. And I would rather be honest about that than lie to you or to anyone else. At the same time, having said that, I don't think that my approach to this is the appropriate one on a communal level. And a lot of Jews reminded me of that when they posted about the fact that it's still a tragedy that someone died. It's always a tragedy when life is lost. Some talked about the story of how angels wanted to sing and dance in celebration when the Egyptians were being drowned to death during the Exodus after the Israelites crossed the Red Sea. And God stopped the angels because how can you celebrate when creation is being destroyed? That's Jewish. That's correct. So, though difficult, we should spare a thought for the loss of a life because no, not everyone came out alive. Relatedly is the trauma for the congregation, not only the hostage crisis, but to have someone killed in a holy space, in a synagogue. It's horrible. A synagogue is a place for, bar bat mitzvahs, for celebrating weddings, mourning after deaths, a place for spirituality, learning, and Judaism, not a place where people are supposed to be killed. So the tragedy is compounded. Again, I actually really did appreciate those posts and comments and tweets about how awful it is that it came to this, because even when as individuals we have inhumane impulses, we should be corrected and learn to not be inhumane, especially as a community. The last few thoughts relating to the situation are about safety. More people are now talking about synagogue safety again, and the ever-present issue that a lot of people and Jews, particularly Jews of color, have had bad experiences with law enforcement and do not, in fact, feel safer with armed police officers, for example, at synagogues and other Jewish institutions. If you are interested in the read, I actually reported on sort of how Twin Cities Jews learn to trust law enforcement and about the dilemma of security versus the feeling of safety and context of the police reform efforts last year in Minneapolis. That story is linked in the podcast notes. But to bring one thought from that story here, this conversation is going nowhere. And I mean that in sort of both senses of how you could interpret that. We are in a time when no Jewish institution will turn away protection. Every community leader I spoke with for the story said basically the same thing. We understand law enforcement has problems. We understand they make many people feel unsafe. But the Jewish community needs protection, and we're not going to refuse to use the resources we have. So, this balance of being welcoming and being secure, that's one of the big Jewish stories for the next many, many, many years. The last thought on this was a deep sense of anger I felt at watching some people post that the United States isn't a safe place for Jews anymore. This hostage situation was awful. Yes, we are in a time of rising anti-Semitism. Yes, we have faced horrible attacks like the one at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018. Yes, there are many reasons for Jews to be afraid. But especially as a kid from an immigrant Jewish family from the Soviet Union, constantly looking to the rest of the world at Jewish life everywhere and how Jews are treated and what they're at risk of, concluding that the United States isn't a safe place for Jews is crazy to me. There's a great Twitter thread from Alex Zeldin, a fellow Russian-speaking Jew, linked in the podcast notes explaining why America is still great for Jews. Go read that if you have any doubts. But I'll just say, there is still no country in the world that has accepted Jews the way America has. A rabbi and 3 congregants were taken hostage, and everyone from the President of the United States on down were paying attention. We do matter in this country. And honestly, even in Israel, the Jewish state, good luck trying to be reform or conservative or whatever kind of Jewish you want to be when the Orthodox Rabbanut controls conversions and marriages and so many other aspects of life in such a dictatorial way that Israelis are sick of it. Israelis are rebelling against it, and Israelis are frustrated with living in Israel. The hidden truth of Israel is, you know what? It's not actually that great of a place to be Jewish sometimes. In America, you don't have that. You have a mix of communities and stories, and you can pick and choose whatever way you want to be Jewish, and really no one can tell you no. For all the issues with democracy in this country, and there are many, many that need to be addressed, we are not Jews living under dictators in Russia, Belarus, Hungary. We're not living in Poland, which has repeatedly tried and succeeded to criminalize education and study about the Holocaust. Don't get me wrong, there are vibrant Jewish communities all around the world. including in Russia, Belarus, Hungary, and Poland. I don't mean to knock them, but I'm saying it's a complete loss of perspective to paint the entire United States as entirely no good for Jews anymore. And by the way, let's also take a broader view of the fact that not feeling safe in this country isn't just about being Jewish. As Americans, we're afraid of being shot down in our stores, our schools, our workplaces, our homes. Many of the problems aren't about us being Jews. They are larger American problems about being unsafe. We don't need to put all of that on us as Jews. And even with all the fear, again, America is still a great place to be Jewish. We can't lose that. Too many Jews have spent too much effort and dreaming to get to this country to build a better life, which many have achieved. We don't get to just hand-wave that away. We recognize problems and we try to address them, but we don't forget that there are so many reasons we are still blessed to live in this country, even when it doesn't seem or feel that way. I get it. I'm also exhausted, especially after the pandemic, but that can't overrule everything. And for the final word, I'll defer to a quote from Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, something he said in an NPR interview that you can find linked in the podcast notes, in response to a question about how he will approach security from now on in the Jewish community.
We will do what we always do, which is the best we can. Whether we're in a synagogue or a church or a mosque, whether we are religious or not, we are imperfect human beings trying to live the best we can, because we can't know the future, we can't know what's coming, and we also can't live in fear every step of the way.
This has been this week's The Jews Are Tired podcast. I'm Lev Gringauz. Don't forget to subscribe and share, and hopefully next week, the Jews will get some rest. The Jews Are Tired is a product of Jewfolk Inc. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com or email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com. A link to the transcript of this episode is available in the podcast notes, along with links to any news, stories, or reports referenced for this episode.